Welcome. Today is the third day of Cheshvan, the 4th of November, and we're a little bit off to a late start this week. We're starting this week's Parsha, Parashat Lech-Lecha, the first Parsha of Abraham, today on Monday, and hopefully we'll try to get in 4 more classes this week. And following the plan this year, we're going to be looking at articles that are in the Wonders magazine, which you can usually download Monday night from patreon.com/galeinai, GALEINAI. We're going to start off with something that's not going to be in the Wonders magazine, because simply not enough room, but I think it's one of the most interesting models that Rev Ginsburg has taught over the years. I remember when we were listening to it in this was 2006. It was astonishing. He gave an entire seminar on what's known as kinesiology. There's 2 forms of kinesiology. There is the what you would call the scientific form, which is kinesthetics, basically, which is a study of motion, especially in the human body. And then there's the offshoot, which some people will say is alternative medicine, some people will say is completely pipe dream medicine, kinesiology, which is done in all kinds of variations. Won't get into them right now, but the interesting model that came out of these classes was that of motion. Why is this related to this week's Parsha? Because in the very beginning of our Torah portion, we hear that Abraham is moving from the north to the south in the land of Israel. Now, Abraham came from Haran. Haran is, as we've discussed a few times, in modern-day Turkey, very southern Turkey, and by the origins of the Euphrates River. And Abraham had gone there from Mesopotamia following his father Terach and their entire family. And it's well known that during that time there was a mass migration from Mesopotamia to Turkey, to Asia Minor. And some of the people, like Abraham, received only Abraham probably received divine instruction to go south. And when you go south from Asia Minor, from what today is Turkey, you end up going through Lebanon. If you follow the Jordan River, you come into the land of Israel. And Abraham makes his way down south, and in the end, he even reaches Egypt. That's as far south as he goes. This for him is one of his tests. He had 10 trials, 10 tests altogether. This was one of them, because his whole purpose was to come to the promised land. And when he finally arrives, he's forced to leave and go all the way down to Egypt because of a famine that broke out in the land of Israel at that time. The way that the Torah describes Abraham's journeys is in Genesis 12, verse 9. In English, they translated it as, let me read it for you. Oh, I unfortunately lost it for a second. The way they translated here is, then Abram, his name at this stage, he doesn't have the extra H, so his name is Abram. Abram journeyed by stages towards the Negev. The Negev is the southern part of the Holy Land, the southern part of the land of Israel. Today we just call it the Negev, and Negev literally means the south. So he journeyed by stages. The words in Hebrew is haloch v'nasoa hanigba. Haloch v'nasoa. Haloch v'nasoa, really the only way to translate this literally is to say he journeyed and he moved. Haloch v'nasoa. Or we could say he walked and he journeyed. It's like almost 2 synonyms that make up the same an idiom that means to journey. It would be like, but really the way that you need to understand this in English is something like to and fro. When you say to and fro, what do you mean? At least what I think you mean is that you're going forwards in general, but it's done in maybe like a zigzag motion. Zigzag is another interesting idiom in English, which also means that you want to go straight, but for some reason, whatever it is, maybe you have to evade something or whatever else it is, you're going with zigging and zagging. Where they came to this from, I don't know. But there's, in every language, I'm sure, there's this need to describe motion that is not linear, that is not going directly to the goal, to the final destination, but that you have to take all kinds of detours or shifts in the movement, like to and fro. So haloch v'nasoa is saying that Abraham was journeying and then he had to camp. He journeyed and he camped, even though both words mean to walk, to move. But the idea here is, and that's the way the Rashi explains it, is that he's moving and then camping. Moving and camping. And every time that he's camping, he's also doing something. It's part of the movement. It's not that the encampment is some kind of unwanted part of the journey. No, everything is needed. And we see something very similar when the Israelites come out of Egypt and they have to make 42 journeys in the wilderness. And those 42 journeys are also, they're counted as journeys, at the end of each of which they encamped. So it's the same idea. Haloch v'nasoa. Now, this is not the first time that we find an idiom like this in the Torah. The first time that we find someone who's described as moving forward, but somehow doing something else at the same time, is Cain. After Cain admitted to having killed Abel, God tells him, you will receive a punishment. He says to him, this is in Genesis 4:12, you will be na v'nad ba'aretz. You will wander the earth. That's the way it's translated. Na v'nad, even today in modern Hebrew, means that you can't find a resting place. Na v'nad. Na is to move, nu'ah, movement, and nad is also the same thing. It's a movement. So it's a person who's restless, who doesn't have the presence of mind, who doesn't have the ability to stay in one place. He's like a wanderer. Today we would say maybe somebody who has wanderlust, but it's not because they want to. It's because they can't stay in one place. They don't have the stability needed to take root in one place. Now this is very interesting because Cain ends up being the first person to build a city. And the city is exactly the opposite of the hunter-gatherer, of the description that we might think, that maybe Cain is related to being a hunter-gatherer because he's wandering the earth. He's going all over. He's never stable. He's never in the same place. There's another phrase like this that's much more well-known, and this is the famous phrase from the first chapter of Ezekiel describing the chariot. And there we say that the angels in the chariot, angels called the living angels, v'achayot ratzo v'shov. They run and return. Now here we definitely have two words together that talk about motion, but the idiom is constructed out of two complete opposites. By the way, even in the previous one we talked about Cain, nav v'nad, sometimes the word nad means something that's not moving. I think that comes from Aramaic. So, maim delon, sometimes it are naide means to move, And sometimes a nod is a vessel, something that's holding on to something, and it's not letting it move out. So a nod would be a skin used, a leather skin that would be used to carry water. So you're using it to contain the water, to make sure that the water doesn't spill. But again, getting back to Ezekiel and the angels that are called animals, or the living ones, they're Ratzo Vashov. And we've talked about this many, many times, about the importance of this phrase in all of Kabbalistic literature, even in ethical literature in Judaism, and especially in Chassidus afterwards. And we say that this one is very, very special because, first of all, it's what Ezekiel sees in the chariot. So it's not even talking about human beings. To begin with, it's talking about some kind of heavenly construct that's called Ratzo Vashov, running and returning. And then we have so much built on that in terms of the rectification of a person's psyche, that life is always in motion. In fact, the medieval philosophers took from this verse, Chayot Ratzo Vashov, that the living ones, the living angels, were running and returning. They took the concept, which is echoed in Aristotle and elsewhere, also in Greek philosophy, that the sign that something is alive is that it moves. Now, if this is a little surprising, think about the word animal. The word animal, which means something that's alive, actually comes from the Greek that is anima. Anima is something that's animated, that's moving. I think we've talked about this in the past. So we have this idea of Ratzo Vashov. This is the third idiom we've seen. We've seen Haloch v'nasoa, Na v'nad, and now we've seen Ratzo Vashov. There's a fourth idiom. This one already comes from the sages, meaning we're talking about the first, second centuries. And here we have a description, and this is a description from nature. What is there's this verse in the Song of Azinu at the end of Deuteronomy that we just saw a couple of weeks ago. Kenesher ya'ir kino al gozalav yirachif. Like an eagle that is awakening its nest, it hovers over its chicks. The idea of hovering, especially by the eagle, is that it touches and doesn't touch the nest. The eagle is so heavy that if it were to touch the nest, it would crush it. So it has to hover in such a way that it's only awakening its young and giving them their food, but it's not putting its full weight on them because it would crush them. So we have this concept called nogea eino nogea, touching and not touching at the same time. Again, this is already a fourth idiom that's talking about motion, moving in a certain direction. In this case, it's a little bit of the opposite, actually, because we're talking about the eagle like coming to rest on its nest, and it doesn't fully come to rest. So it's coming to rest and then receding, coming to rest and receding, moving its wings all the time to ensure that it doesn't fully put all its weight on the nest. And this phrase from the sages is translated in the Zohar as mate velo mate. And it means the same thing, basically, touching and not touching. But in the Zohar, it's used in a different meaning than with regard to the eagle. It's a different meaning altogether. So now we have these 5 different phrases. I'm going to go over them again in the order in which they appear in the Torah. So the first one is na v'nad, from Cain, wandering, as we said. Then we have Abraham in our Torah portion, in Lech-Lecha, haloch v'nasoa. We would be inclined, I'm sorry I didn't mention this earlier, well, let me finish the 5 and we'll come back to haloch v'nasoa. So the second one is haloch v'nasoa. He's moving and he's encamping on the way. The third one we saw was from Ezekiel, Ratzo Vashov, running and returning. The fourth one is from the sages, who describe the hovering of the eagle as nogea ve'ino nogea, touching and not touching. And finally, the translation of this into Aramaic in the Zohar, which is mate velo mati, which literally means the same thing, touching and not touching, but in the Zohar it shows up in a different context, which we'll have to discuss. I want to go back for a second to Haloch v'Nasoah. Haloch v'Nasoah, which is in our parsha, it's one of the first verses, it's tempting to say that the name of the parsha is also, the name of this Torah portion this week is also connected to this, because it says Lech-Lecha. We hear in Lech-Lecha, meaning go, really what it means is go for your own sake. So the two words are not words of motion. Like when I say even touching, not touching, I'm still talking about motion, about touching and not touching. I'm still moving my finger, let's say, that's what I'm touching with, or the eagle with his claws. Lech-Lecha, though, even though it sounds that way, it's only reminiscent of this. But still, there's something about this parsha, the name of the parsha, Lech-Lecha, which indicates motion, right? And in fact, most of the time, when the parsha is named, it's not called Lech-Lecha because it's a little too long. So 4 letters. So we just call it Lecha or Lech, go. That's enough. The 2 letters, Lamed Chaf, that's the name of the parsha. So what we want to do now, in order to make this into a partzuf, so now we have 5 different phrases which seem to mean the same thing, but as we'll see, each one of them means something entirely different. This is about motion that we want, and we want to describe different types of motion. So the Torah gives us a wealth of idioms to work with. So what we'll do tomorrow is we'll take these 5 idioms, each one composed of 2 words or 2 movements. Sometimes it's more than 2 words, but it's 2 movements. One is progressing, the one is regressing, as we'll see tomorrow. And we'll want to construct a model out of them that will help us better understand both the sfirot. Because we have 10 words here, or 10 ideas here, obviously it's going to correspond to the 10 sfirot. But it's also going to show us some relationships between the sfirot, because again, these are two-part idioms, each one of them. So we're going to have to correspond them to 2 sfirot each. So they're going to show us how the different motions that we have correspond to the sfirot, and it's going to teach us also, or reveal to us, new things about the relationships between the sfirot. So that's it for today, and I hope you can join me tomorrow, and we'll continue looking at this model of motion, which is really the essence of these days. It's in fact, let me just end with one thing. We usually say that the name of the first 2 Torah portions is Bereshit Noach. The beginning of the Torah is Bereshit, in the beginning, Noach. Noach means be restful. Noach's name, Noah, his name in Hebrew means that he's resting. He was given this name because he's supposed to offer respite. But the idea is that in the beginning you should be restful. But then when you come to the 3rd week of the Torah reading, our week, then it's Lech-Lecha. Then it's already, you have to start getting on the move. You rested enough already. The year has started, you had 2 weeks to rest. Now you have to start getting things in gear and starting to move. So that'll be our first topic this week, and we'll look at this more in depth tomorrow. Thanks for joining. Hope to see you.